Ozarks. With her bedraggled black and grey hair, funny eyes, one yellow and one green, and her crooked nose, old Betty was not a pretty picture, but she was the best there was at fixing what ailed a man, and that was all that counted. Old Betty's house was full of herbs and roots and bottles filled with conjuring medicine. The walls were lined with strange books brimming with magical spells. Old Betty was the only one living in the hollow who knew how to read. Her granny, who was also a conjurer, had taught her the skill as part of her magical training. Just about the only friend old Betty had was a tough, mean, ugly old razorback hog that ran wild around her place. It rooted so much in her kitchen garbage that all of the leftover smells started affecting it. Some folks swore up and down that the old razorback hog sometimes walked upright like a man. One fellow claimed he'd seen the pig sitting on the rocker on old Betty's porch, chattering away to her while she stewed up some potions in the kitchen, but everyone discounted that story on account of the fellow who told it was a little too fond of moonshine. Rawhead was the name old Betty gave to the razorback, referring maybe to the way the ugly creature looked, a bit like some of the dead pigs come butchering time down at the Hogscald Hollow. The razorback didn't mind the funny name. Rawhead kept following old Betty around her little cabin and rooting up the kitchen leftovers. He'd even walked her down with her when she came to the local mercantile to sell her home remedies. Well, folks in town got so used to seeing Rawhead and old Betty around town that it looked mighty strange one day, hog driving time, when old Betty came to the mercantile without him. "Where's Rawhead?" the owner asked as he accepted her basket full of home remedy potions. The liquid in the bottle swished in an agitated manner as old Betty said, "I ain't seen him around today, and I'm mighty worried. You seen him here in town?" "Nobody's seen him around today. They would have told me if they did," said the mercantile owner. "We'll keep a lookout for you." "That's mighty kind of you. If you see him, tell him to come home straight away," old Betty said. The mercantile owner nodded in agreement, and he handed over the weekly pay. Old Betty fussed at herself all the way home. It wasn't like Rawhead to disappear, especially not on the day that they went to town. The man said at the mercantile always saved the best scraps for the mean old razorback, and Rawhead never missed a visit. When the old conjuring woman got home, she mixed up a potion and poured it onto a flat plate. "Where's that old hog got to?" she asked the liquid. It clouded over and with a series of pictures formed. First, old Betty saw the good-for-nothing hunter that lived on the next ridge, sneaking around in the forest, rounding up razorback hogs that didn't belong to him. One of those hogs was Rawhead. Then she saw him taking the put his horse into the stall. Very funny, the hunter said. When he came out of the stall, he saw Rawhead had crept forward a little further. Now his luminous yellow eyes and his bare claws could be seen. Land of gosh, and what have you got those big claws for? He snapped. You look ridiculous. To dig your grave, Rawhead intoned softly, his voice in a deep rumble that raised the hairs on the back of the hunter's neck. He stirred uneasily, not sure how the crazy kid in his loft would have made such a scary sound, if it really was a crazy kid. Feeling a little spooked, he hurried to the door and let himself out of the barn. Rawhead slipped out of the loft and climbed down the side of the barn behind him. With nary a rustle to reveal his presence, Rawhead raced through the trees and up the path to a large moonlit rock. He hid in the shadow of the huge stone so that only the things showing were his gleaming yellow eyes, his bare claws, and his raccoon tail. When the hunter came level with the rock on the side of the path, he gave a startled yelp. Staring at Rawhead, he gasped, "You nearly knocked the heart right out of me, you crazy kid. Land o' gosh, and what have you got that crazy tail for?" "To sweep your grave," Rawhead boomed, his enchanted voice echoing through the woods, getting louder and louder with each echo. The hunter took his heels and ran for his cabin. He raced past the old well house, past the woodpile, over the rotting fence and into his yard.